Let me start with a confession about the most misunderstood tool in all of podcasting, the solo episode. You guys know the one. There's no guest, it's just you and a microphone. Now, I confess that in the time that I've been podcasting, I've used these as filler. I've used them as the last resort episode. I have used them to fling things out into the world that are half cooked and oftentimes half cocked. Now, this ended for me some time ago as I realized the importance of this type of episode, and it's going to end for you today as well. So let's find out why solo episodes need to stop being a filler slash escape route and why they could possibly be your greatest audience conversion tool in your kit with your podcast. So when it comes to solo episodes, let's take a look. Most people reach for it for exactly the wrong reason. That is, they they are looking for an out. They are looking for an escape route, uh, and it's because the guest canceled. The episode drops next Thursday, and your pipeline came up empty for you this week. You're up against a wall on a deadline to produce content for what's going out in your world, and you go, you know what? I'll just do a solo episode this week. And I promise you that your listeners can smell that from a mile away. However, done correctly, a solo episode is the most powerful type of episode you can make. Why? Because it's your opportunity to deepen your one-on-one relationship with your listeners. It's your chance to teach something that's relevant to them, to take a stance on something that matters to your industry, to be one of the voices in the room instead of being the person walking around and holding a microphone to everybody else. So today isn't a do more solo episodes call, and it's not a never do those kind of episodes. Today is about that line right between the two of them. When a solo is a power move versus when it's a cop out. And how to make sure that every single time you turn that microphone on with nobody across from you, that you land on the right side of that line. So if you host a show, especially a B2B interview-based show, this hour is going to take a good hard look at how you think about that empty chair across from you. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we are going to get a crystal clear view on what a solo episode actually is, and the one thing it can never be allowed to become. Then, once you've earned the right to do one, because not every show has yet, after that, for number 3, we're going to take a look at the framing, the prep, and 3 places that this is gotten wrong for people. And then the payoff and a catch that nobody really warns you about. And finally, we're going to close with a legit example from one of my customers where somebody really nailed this and did this right. So before we start with that, though, Bernie, my wonderful producer friend, man, would you be so kind as to put up our first poll question here so that everybody can vote on that, which is a good time. And the question is very simple. Have you ever done a solo episode before for your podcast? And yeah, sure, I do them regularly. I've done them once or twice in a tight spot, that escape hatch, if you will. You've never done one, or I host a show, but if I don't have a guest, we don't record. And that might fall into the no, I've never done a solo episode, but I wanted to pull that out specifically because there are folks who will kind of break from the idea of recording if they don't have somebody to talk to, if you will. So we're gonna let that run. And actually, I am really surprised here. This is 100% the opposite of what I was expecting. This would be that you guys would vote for this, which is crazy. Crazy. I did 100% opposite of what I thought it was. I thought it was gonna be yes, I do them regularly, having that largest piece there. So that's really interesting, and I think there's an opportunity for at least a half dozen of you to really learn something today, which is great. So let's get on with that. We'll pull that down. And there we are. So as we move into section 1 here, let's talk about how I define strategic versus tactical ideas for this whole concept, because today we're going to be talking about both. Now, the strategic idea is much like how an army general might define that. That's what's the overarching plan to defeat the enemy? How do we take their capital city? What do we need to do that? But when it comes to a tactical idea, I want you to think about the really small stuff. If we use the same analogy, how do we take and hold this key road into that capital city? It's probably one of 2,000 or 3,000 small things that needs to happen before that city is safely captured. So before we get to the tactical, I want you to lock in one big strategic idea for today because everything else stems from it. A solo episode is a self-contained thing that is built around one idea only. One idea. That's it. Start to finish. What it is not is a variety show. It's not, oh, let's do a little housekeeping. Oh, let's do a mailbag segment. And then some random thoughts I had in the shower about the show, plus a plug for whatever thing that's going on. The second your solo episode turns into a grab bag, it stops being a solo episode and it starts being just yappy noise. And people tune out of that because it doesn't have a focus. There's not something that they can grab onto and say, I learned this from my time with this podcast episode. So here's the test I want you to use today. If you can't say in one sentence, we'll say 10 words or less, what your solo episode is about, you are not ready to hit record on it. If you can't do that, that idea is not ready to be a solo episode yet. So, if a solo episode is one idea, what are the good ideas? I break these down into two groups. The main course ideas and the seasoning ideas. If you know me, you know I love analogies. The main course, these are things that you can build a whole solo episode around, like we just talked about. And there are 3 of them. One is editorializing. You're taking a stance. Your podcast is your platform to speak to something that actually matters in your world, even when it comes to speaking a little truth to power. You've earned an audience, and this is you spending some of that social trust on something you believe in with them. Now, these are best done when they are tied intimately to your industry. If you run a show in particular that has a niche audience and you're using this to bring content to them on a weekly basis, that's a great way to get this tackled. So to give you an example, if you run a show in the higher ed technology space, using your podcast to draw attention to a housing crisis at a particular institution is likely a decent starting point. But it gets even better if you can use your show and your position to make recommendations and suggestions in your editorial that would actually help improve and fix the issue as well. Now, be careful with this one to not get too deep into the thing you love versus the relationship it has to your show. There needs to be a strong bridge between the two to get good editorial results. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later as we look at our example and things like that. So the second main topic for an episode is a industry trend commentary. Something's moving in your space. I mean, we all know how AI is like different every 10 hours and things like that. But you're the person who can make sense of it for your industry. You're not necessarily being a reporter. You're adding something to the conversation that only you can add. And that is incredibly powerful because when you connect your show's normal topic to what you're commentating on, it really comes together. The example I want to use here is that a podcast about finance may do a great solo episode around America's current economic policy and how it's impacting at the world at large. But if it goes too far into hating on politician X, Y, and Z who are responsible for the situation, it loses a lot of its effectiveness. Don't bring problems to your listeners without bringing solutions, because simply ranting about how a policy is killing your industry is going to keep people is not going to keep people for the long haul. So bring your expertise to bear, provide a controlled, educated take that people stick around for. The third one, and this is one of my favorite ones, is teaching. This one is almost a little bit of a kissing cousin to like what we're doing right now. It's a self-contained lesson. And my favorite version is when you teach something that you already teach somewhere else that your podcast audience may not have been exposed to yet. Now, whether it's something from you speaking on stage or a workshop you sell or something along those lines, that is you're kind of taking the locks off of your best stuff, but it can often make an incredible episode because it's all battle tested before an audience. So those are the three topics we talked about for a main course, right? Editorial, industry commentary, and teaching. We're going to pivot to the seasoning topics. Those are the things that can live inside of a solo episode, but you can't let them become the whole meal. So first is, and I've seen this, I used to recommend this stuff years ago. It was State of the Show. And I watched one of my clients nail this a couple weeks ago when I was writing this presentation. It wasn't even a solo episode, but at the end of a great interview, he took 30, maybe 45 seconds and said, so, hey, guest, I really appreciate you being on. And listeners, just like that, we've reached the end of another season of the podcast. So before I wrap up, I want to say thank you. Seriously, thank you to so much to everyone who's listening and spending some time with me every couple weeks on every other Tuesday and being a part of this community. We're going to take a short break during the month of July, and I'll be back with a new season and new episodes every other Tuesday starting August 11th. Enjoy your summer. And that was his state of the show. It was 45 seconds long, and it was the perfect size to update us for the past and the future. As a sign off from a conversation, it was beautiful. But we don't need to spend 20 minutes talking about why he's going on vacation for July. It's way, way too thin unless you're either shutting down the show completely and kind of having that nostalgia walkthrough, or if you're completely retooling it so that it doesn't resemble its original form. The second seasoning topic, and we talked about this, we mentioned this earlier, is that mailbag. And I'm even more cautious about this. It is great when you get people responding to you, writing you emails, DMs, whatever it might be. And replying to those is a key part of audience building and audience management. But you've got to weave it in and not run it as like a recurring segment. And I think the better move here is when you open an episode, potentially, you say, hey, I got this message this week. And it's a perfect way into what I want to talk about today. And maybe you read a little bit of that message to set the stage for what you're talking about for an episode, whether you have a guest or not. That's using a mailbag properly. Letting listener questions run the whole episode, kind of America's Funniest Home Videos style, I guess, is it's kind of a variety show trap that we talked about sneaking back in. So to close this piece of our presentation today, all in all, the seasoning is supposed to make the meal better. It's not the meal. Some seasonings are absolutely delicious. You should try what I put on my brisket. But you wouldn't want to just eat that spoonful of salt, pepper, onion powder, garlic powder, brown sugar, and cumin because it would be awful. So there's not only a great way to make a solo episode, but also a great brisket rub. So while we're here, I do want to take a couple of folks off of mute here, and I appreciate when you guys kind of talk in here as well. And I want to take a moment about this first segment to find out how you've used solo episodes in your podcast from those of you too who said, yes, I've done this a couple times, and then maybe just tell us how it went. And those for you who have not done a solo episode, the question I want you to consider is why not? What gives you heartburn about that? What gives you or maybe it's just something you haven't thought about. So I will open the floor here and use the hand raise little tool down in the it's under the React menu, I believe, in this case, which is great. So we'll see who's going to step in first here. And let me come out of screen share so I'll see each other. There we go. Good deal. Any hands?
Yeah, I'll kind of start, Rob, and I'm sure
thanks,
there's some other people that will probably agree with me. The idea of having to come up with my own content to talk about every single week seems really daunting, as opposed to bringing in guests or other, potential co-hosts to help share some of that load.
Interesting. Okay, so you're preferring somebody out there who has kind of a pre-packaged meal, for lack of a better term, for you to serve rather than cooking from scratch. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anybody else with that kind of, again, whether it's the heartburn of not doing one or it's, hey, I did this and here's how it went.
Yeah, I guess I could jump in here, Rob, if you guys
Yeah,
can
go for
hear
it,
me.
man.
Yeah,
Good to see you.
yeah. So good to see you. So I did start a podcast last year, and it's kind of faded out. But many of the episodes, I think 5 of the episodes were basically just me, and I think I felt completely comfortable with it, if I'm honest.
Good.
I wouldn't call myself necessarily a thought leader, but have shitloads of ideas. And that's sort of where that came from. And honestly, I think two of the episodes, I think I know what you mean by mailbag, but I had reached out to my network and said, "Hey, what do you think about this idea?" And so, came in with the questions they asked and just gave, my opinion on what they asked. So did it go well? I didn't get a lot of views, but again, the
Okay.
podcast was fairly new. I was trying to figure out YouTube and, some of the other sites. But it wasn't really a problem. Like I kind of enjoyed it. And, I don't know how to compare it to having a guest necessarily.
Sure.
Um, but
Well,
yeah,
and it's good to hear you found it enjoyable, Brandon, because I think that there's a level of, you mentioned you're not a thought leader, but I mean, I've met you in person, man. You kind of you step into that line a little bit. You know your stuff, and that's a good thing. Everybody's got their thing, and I think becoming comfortable with presenting to people in a recording-ish type setup rather than face-to-face one-on-one or in a group setting or whatever it might be, I think that's a real benefit that can come out of this. But it's interesting to hear that you felt that the mailbag stuff of asking folks, it didn't maybe quite perform as you had hoped, and I think that's kind of getting into that variety show piece that I was mentioning. Because you can shift topics so much. If you're doing hey, I asked my listeners to ask me questions about, I'm just using an example here, real estate. If I'm a real estate agent, that can go so many different directions. And I actually had a podcast that about 4 or 5 years ago did this on a semi-regular basis, and it was interesting sometimes. But as I reflect on that, I can see those gear shifts, and it was like it wasn't always smooth. And so I'm looking at that too, as to why I kind of came up with this myself, of like, let's reframe this for people where that jankiness, for lack of a better term, is likely what doesn't keep people in the groove of sticking along, because they came for topic A and topic A is over. Now we're on topic B, which is something completely different. So lots
yeah,
of it there. I think we're gonna take a uh, continue on here, which is just spectacular. Thank you, both Bernie and Brandon, for jumping in on that. I do really appreciate it. Let me get those slides back up, and here we go. All right. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay. Now, every I should not say every show has episodes out there, but not every show has earned the right to do a solo episode yet. And it's like, why why would I say that? And I want to be really specific about what I'm talking about here, because most people get this wrong because they're looking at the wrong metrics. The idea behind a solo episode is not supposed to be about downloads or DMs or follower count or, oh my gosh, it's an emergency. It's none of that value or that vanity stuff. What you're looking for when you should look to create a solo episode with meaning and with purpose is, do you have a library of real conversations that's big enough for you to step away from your normal format? And it reads more as a deliberate detour that way, rather than you scrambling to fill a hole and pop the escape hatch because you've got nothing this week. So you're going to hear people throw out numbers like 30 episodes, 50 episodes, and fine, sure. That's great for a ballpark. It's like asking what the average price of a house is. You can't find that house that's $428,600 because half are higher than that, half are lower than that. Uh, but it's just, the number is a proxy for the real question, which is, again, do you have content that people have been enjoying for a long time that they would welcome a well arranged, planned detour from? Because here's what's happened if you don't do that. If you do a solo episode, 6 episodes in, and it's just you with no audience, you're just talking into the void. That's not a solo episode. That's creating some content for social media and kind of shouting out there to everybody, because you don't have that audience built yet. Nobody has a reason to care what you're saying yet, because you haven't given them one. So build your library first. Get those episodes with your guests and with your main focus of your show under your belt, and give your audience that enjoyment of seeing that detour, rather than kind of wondering, wow, 5 episodes in, I thought this was a podcast about technology and the trades, and we're talking about something that's not that. So that's where you want to go with that. As we head on here, you've got the library. Let's say you got the library, and you're working on the build up of that further. So how often do you do a solo episode? And I say sparingly. Back to that seasoning thing, you can over season something. The rule I use is, if you're doing more than one solo every 10 episodes, that is pushing it, in my opinion. 1 in 20, kind of seasonally, no pun intended for seasoning, seasonal. That's where I feel like things kind of hit really right. Because a solo episode is a spice, to continue that analogy. It's not your staple foods that you get from the cabinet. So back to the elephant in the room for a moment. We all know what that is. I talked about it right away. Most solo episodes get made because your guest pipeline ran dry. You don't have somebody to talk to this week. It's the, crap, there's no guest. And look, behind the scenes, a solo can quietly save a dry week. It can be that bridge that gets you to your next guest episode, but it can never feel to your audience like you took the easy way out, or that you hit the panic button for your listener, ever. The whole point of what we're talking about today is to make that rescue invisible. So step one to keep that rescue invisible is to never need it in the first place, right? It's like getting into a bad situation in life. You don't walk down the dark alley or whatever it may be. Keeping your guest pipeline full. If you were here joining us back in March, April, May, and if it's your first time, don't worry about it. I'm super glad you're here. But if you've joined us for our past ones of these webinars, I've talked about this system. I call it the 2-a-day. Every single day, you find 2 podcasts that fit your industry and the appropriate size of show you should be guesting on. Most folks want to start in that like top 10% of podcasts as rated by Listen Notes, which, by the way, is a great tool for doing this. You want to send each show you select a short personal pitch after you evaluate them. Their contact info is likely on Listen Notes, which is great. Keep that pitch to 150 words or less, and give them the following things: a very brief overview of who you are, why you want a guest, and an idea for an episode that is a perfect fit for their audience. So just 2 of those little emails a day. Tomorrow, 2 new ones. The day after that, 2 more. Not necessarily automated, not spammy, short, human. You do that consistently, and you will likely never be staring down a recording day with no guests and no plan. This way, a solo episode can become a choice that you make on purpose, not a fire that you are putting out. There is one caveat to this method, and I will stress that in the time I just spent talking about it here, this is a highly simplified version that we're using as a point of reference today. In the playlist that this is going to be on afterwards, you'll actually be able to access the full presentation on the 2-a-day method and things like that. I believe it was March or April that we did that. But that is one of those things where this simplified version will at least get you started. And then the other piece of advice I want to give you on this is that if you do decide to guest prospect, you have to keep up on it. This isn't a non-negotiable, because if it's a negotiable, it doesn't work. You either guest prospect or you don't. The start-stop stuff does not fly. So if that is something that interests you, that entire process is not only outlined in the webinars, but also our Pitch Lab course, which goes even deeper. And that's actually something that if you're interested in, it has a offer. You probably saw the emails ahead of time that gives you 15% off for being here and learning with us today. If you want to learn more about guesting on podcasts and how to do it right, that course was made specifically for you. I see a question here. I'm going to tackle that real quick out of order here. Thanks for flagging that, Bernie. Karen, thank you for asking this. Would you say the inverse holds true? If the podcast is a solo podcast in format, would it make sense to have a guest? I would say yes. I would say that would be a great spice to throw into the soup, if you will, to bring somebody on, especially if they are, people use the word special a lot. And to quote a great movie, The Incredibles, when everyone's special, no one is. So the thing I would say is taking a look at why would you want to bring that guest on? And finding a very good use case for that, I think would be an excellent reason to have that guest on a solo episode, but then again, return to format. If people are there for you, give them more of what they initially showed up for, but be prepared to, have your library stand and then take that intentional detour. Fabulous question. Thank you so much for asking that. I'm glad we tackled into that, which is great. So we should be in good shape there. Great question. We talked about the pitch lab. Let's keep on moving on. Let's say you've decided to do that solo episode purposely. It's not the emergency button that's, popping the life raft out. The single biggest thing that separates a solo that works out for you from one that flops is the frame you set in the first 6 or so seconds of the episode. And there's a wrong way and a right way to do this, and they're way closer than you think. The wrong frame is to frame it as a situation of absence. Anything that signals, well, I didn't have a guest this week, you don't want it to be apologetic, because if it's apologetic, it's likely low energy. And there's probably a bit of unfamiliarity that creeps in from your voice, and your audience is going to feel that instantly. The right frame is the opposite of that, intention. It sounds like this. Today, I'm taking a moment to share with you something that really matters to me, something that I teach that is genuinely relevant to you, my dear listener, and that's why we're talking about it right now. It's the same episode after that, but it's completely different framing and perception right from the beginning. So let me tell you about a quick story that I watched this go sideways. I had a host once, and he normally talked about higher ed technology, week in, week out. And one week he used his show to talk about that university housing issue I mentioned earlier. Totally off his usual lane. And in the moment, I was super frustrated with him for doing his show this way. And I thought, man, you didn't consult me on this. You're missing the boat. Get back to your topic. The thing that your show is about. It's the title on the screen there. Nobody's going to listen to this because it's not a show about higher ed housing solutions. It's a show about higher ed technology. But as I look back at that episode years later, it wasn't actually the content that was the problem. The content was actually fine and quite good. What was missing were those bits of framing at the beginning. If he'd opened up with, hey, we normally talk higher ed tech here, but this platform also lets me speak about things that matter in our world, and that's why I'm here using it for this today. Your audience would have had clarity instead of like the whiplash of like, why are we talking about housing? And an even better thing to add to this would be that how this is just a discussion around his normal show's topic, that higher ed technology might be able to be used to solve this. So on the surface, it's the same episode. Again, 99% of it is the same, but one or two missing sentences are what keep it from adding to your content library versus being an episode your listener goes, man, I hope they're back to the normal discussion next week. That's why framing matters. So the second thing about a solo episode is a hill that I'm going to die on. You cannot wing a solo episode. Winging a podcast, especially from hosting, is a genuinely rare skill. And even if you think you've got it, I'm going to tell you probably don't. And I say that as someone with a bachelor's in broadcast communications who's won speaking and presentation contests. I'm a talker. This off-the-cuff stuff is like my thing. And I still do not have the capability to walk into a solo episode cold. And by the way, this whole presentation, I script this as well because it's that important that I present to you every single bit of this in as high quality a method as possible. So here's what prep actually looks like for a solo episode. Like I said, for this, I read a whole script. There are no bullet points. It is word for word. And here's the trick that I use. I write it the way that I talk. There are a ton of idiosyncrasies in how I talk because of where I'm from, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and who I am. I use the analogies, which is again something I love to do. I use the Wisconsinisms. If I say "ope," that's probably intentionally in there, and that's a very Midwestern thing. I write these things out verbatim, And sometimes I even put the bold, the underline, the all caps for the types of emphasis that I want to bring to people. I'll even do stage directions. And here's why both halves matter. The first full script is what keeps you from fumbling what you want to tell people or forgetting the points you wanted to make. But it also lets you kind of go off the cuff a little bit as well. There were a couple things in that last exchange about Wisconsinisms and things like that. That ope piece I inserted myself. It was not on script. So you know that feeling though. You get to the end of talking about something, you go, I forgot to mention the one point. The script eliminates that. And the best part is you can even check that script for continuity and clarity with an AI tool to make sure that you don't miss points or that you tie up all your loose ends. The other really big thing is that writing your episode in your spoken voice is what keeps you from sounding like you're reading. Because that's the other thing that can make this fall flat on its face. The second you sound stiff, robotic, or give the inkling that you're reading off of a screen or paper, your solo episode has most of its life and energy sucked right out of it. But when you write your script in a natural way that plays to the way that you talk, you get to the best of both worlds. You sound natural, and nothing important slips through the cracks. So, flipping this script on its head, if you'll pardon the pun, most people think a script makes you robotic. And actually, I believe the opposite is true. A script is actually the thing that frees you to sound natural because you're not up there just white knuckling your own memories in real time. And if your solo episode is teaching or a story, you have that in here. You already know the skeleton. It's the same framework that we've talked about in the past webinars that we've done here. We call it QDCR. The quest, what we're trying to do, the decision, the choice you make that others wouldn't, the consequence, what actually changed, and the reflection, what that taught you and why it matters to the person listening. That structure works just as well on yourself as it does on a guest, and making sure you have a script, make sure that you hit all of those major story points for what you're doing. Now, we have just spent a lot of time talking and learning about how a script is a great way to make sure that your content sounds authentic, but I want to shift this all back to you folks as well. As a listener, I'm sure each and every one of you has probably run across a situation where you've gone, that person is clearly winging it. And I'd love to know, how does that make you feel? I'd love for you all to take a moment and put that in a short little blurb over in the chat, like just one or two, maybe 3 words. How does that make you feel as you hear somebody be, I guess, wooden in their presentation? We'll let that go for a little bit while folks. Interesting. Awesome and okay, we've got 2 dichotomy there. Awesome and frustrated is definitely 2 ends of the same spectrum of the spectrum there. Don't care about what they're putting out there. Okay, lack of effort. Why am I wasting my time? Interesting. Wait for 1 or 2 more here. Okay, there's definitely had a couple emojis on that. Awesome is an interesting one. I'm curious about that. Is that a sarcastic awesome, Ms. Raymond, or is that a like good for them for being out there and being authentic and genuine? I'm just curious. Feel free to come off mute if you'd like. Oh, that's funny. That was about getting the replay. Okay, then forgive me for including that in there. That's all good. But the overall general thing I'm seeing here, if we put that awesome back where it belongs with everything here, my apologies for that. The frustrated, they don't care. It's a negative listening experience at the end of the day. That is the last thing you want your listener to have. So, as we continue here, let's talk about length of a solo episode. And I am one of these people with a regular interview. Length doesn't matter. A good conversation is a good conversation. The line from Gandalf, a wizard arrives exactly when he means. A podcast is exactly as long as it needs to be. The number 2 question I get asked about podcasts of all time, right after how do I get to be a guest on more of them, is what is the optimal length of a show? And I will tell each and every one of you, there is none. And that's true, I believe, for B2B, B2C, entertainment, hobby podcasts, anything out there, that there is no optimal length. But I think solo episodes are a slight buck to that rule. The solo episode is different because it kind of has to clear a bar. My floor of length for a solo episode is right around 15 minutes. Now, could you do a great 8-minute solo episode? Yes. And I've seen it done. If it is the tightest, most beautifully compartmentalized little learning experience on the planet, it can be 8 minutes long. But most 8-minute shows aren't that. Most of them are just kind of shortchanging the listener because the host underprepared and it feels like a cop out. It frustrates the listener, as you guys popped over in the chat. Now, the other side of the coin, though, is that a 15-minute floor is not a quota to pad things toward either. That's its own sort of cop out. Padding a solo episode to hit a number is just as lazy as phoning in a short one. The bar isn't necessarily runtime, the bar is value. Hit 15 because you've got 15 minutes of really good content and really good substance, not because your clock told you to. You're going to see this in a minute when we look at an actual solo episode that I produced earlier this year that runs around 11 tight minutes and earns every second of that time span. So, why are we doing this though? We've talked about solo episodes. We've said the positives, the negatives. Why do we want to do these? What's the payoff? The first one is probably what you would not expect. If you're like me and you believe in your podcast as a sales and marketing tool, you're oftentimes interviewing your guest as your future ideal customer. And that's the bread and butter of my business. And I know that's the bread and butter of many other folks who run podcasts here. But deep down, I think that a solo episode done right is an excellent pipeline tool. So stick with me on this because this is an interesting thought here. It's not that hard call to action, click the link, book a call kind of thing, or follow up with a guest. It works through demonstration. Think about it this way. Somebody hears you talk about a slice of your industry, something you're really passionate about, really into. It's not AI that's regurgitating things that may or may not be wrong. And a thought forms in their head that no sales pitch could ever plant within them. It's, this person really gets it on this topic. You know what? It might make some sense for me to talk to them. That's it. That's the mechanism. You didn't ask them for anything. You just demonstrated who you are. And if you were with us last month, you know why that fits. The big relational organization shaping deals, those buyers move on demonstrated expertise, not necessarily on a hard ask, because this is a relational transaction. A solo episode can be an industry watering hole if it's done correctly. You're not chasing anybody around trying to get them to come to you. You're becoming the place that everybody on the plains is showing up to. So pumping the brakes for a moment here, I want to do a little bit more QA. We've covered a lot of ground, and I think it might be a good idea for us to just all empty those mental buffers. I love that the chat's been going here. It's been fantastic. So if there are more questions, I'm going to give you folks some time to populate the chat with that. Anything about solo episodes, whatever we've covered today, by all means, go nuts. And then just as you're doing that, a quick reminder, for spending this time with us, everybody is getting the first couple Pitch Lab modules at no charge as a part of our follow-up. That's going to be working around that 2-a-day process I talked about earlier. And of course, there is a promo code for that we will be having here at the end. And of course, we'll send that along too if you decide to grab the whole thing. And then the other thing I do want to mention is if you're running a podcast and the production part, like week in, week out, has really gotten to be more than you're willing to bear, we should probably have a conversation and see how partnering with Westport can make things a heck of a lot easier. Taking a look here in the chat, I don't see any questions, but I do see a comment. Soloist podcasts I listen to are about 15 minutes to an hour in general. One that I listen to weekly is around 10 minutes. Okay, see, there's that, again, value kind of, you got to fill the glass. And if you fill the glass in the shorter amount of time, it's still a full glass of whatever it might be. This is a great question. Raven, thank you so much. How do you do a solo show and not sound like a webinar or preaching? Am I preaching? No, just kidding. Just kidding. That That is a tough one. I think a lot of it is how you come across. A lot of it is people seek the authenticity today. And I think if you get into a position where you're talking about something in a solo episode that is meaningful to you, you can it's a double-edged sword. You can have that emotion, that heaviness, that I'm going to use the word like wetness to it that has a pulling in magnetism, if you will. But the other side of that is I think if you go too hard and too heavy into that, if you are raising your voice and shouting and things like that, if you are not keeping a lid on it, I guess is the best way, is I think that's where the preaching kind of comes in, or the I'm too high on myself kind of thing comes in. I would I would speak to this in a very much the same way that you would find somebody in a coffee shop. That's kind of the way that I would do this, is to avoid sounding webinary or preachy, is I'd take a look at how you would talk to somebody across a table from you in a coffee shop. Because you don't want to be yelling in a coffee shop unless there's a very good reason to yell in a coffee shop. And I think that particular, you know, it's not quite a hushed voice, but that respect for your tone and your pacing and your cadence, that's how you're going to sound much more uh, at home, and at home to your listener when it comes to making a solo episode not sound like you're just, drinking your own wine, if you will. So there's that. That is an excellent question. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate that. Anything else anybody wants to pop in there? Otherwise, we will get rocking here for the last little segment. Um, yeah, we give that a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then right back to it. So let's talk about that second payoff. This is a great one. On a normal interview, you go hunting through the whole conversation for the good pieces, the clippable moments, the quotable lines. On a solo, you engineered them. You built them on purpose. You know where the good stuff is because you presented it and you wrote it. You can chop a good solo episode into a bunch of little pieces of micro content, and you're not hunting for a single one of them. Here's the honest thing I talked about earlier, like the trick nobody tells you. It's not quite as easy as it might be made to appear today, because context for a lot of this matters. You don't have a guest supporting you, things like that. Extracting micro content, I feel, still takes a human being. You can use AI tools, Opus Clips, Riverside, all those things. They have tools that find great candidates for micro content. But a person is what is the difference in deciding what actually resonates with people. Good clips, in my opinion, still take time, patience, practice, context. That AI robot doesn't know your audience. You do. And so when you are doing a solo episode, take your time selecting your micro content, hand select it. And if you do use an AI, make sure you review every piece of that from start to finish to ensure there's not a better, ever so slightly longer video that you should be making for some additional context. Sometimes that context can be just 1 or 2 words, but sometimes it's a few sentences, but it can really make a difference. I've seen this with some of our customers' videos that they make with us. My team has found times where an AI has pulled, maybe a minute and 20-second long video, and it's good. But if it was a minute and 26 seconds, it really clicks because that extra bit of context before or maybe even after it kind of just settles everything in, or has the right amount of humanity in this case to make things click. So this brings me finally to the most important thing I'm going to say all hour here about solo episodes. Yes, solo episodes can save you time, especially on the front end. But you have to understand which time it saves. Solos save you guest load, booking, scheduling, back and forth, talking, intending, and dealing with the what the hell is wrong with your microphone and recording day. All of that is gone. And that's a huge time saver. But a solo episode does not save you production load. That part doesn't go away. Think about what's still actually on your plate when you have a solo episode. You still have a full episode of content to make. You still have to edit audio and likely video. You have to cut all the micro content. Like I said, probably by hand. A typical audio episode from start to finish, in my experience, is around 4 hours of work, including the recording there. A video episode, 8 to 10. A solo trims some of that off the top, sure, but it doesn't collapse it down to just record and post. Here's the trap. People try to ship a solo in an hour. They record it, they export it, done. They upload it. Here's what happens, though, to your listener. They feel that drop in polish right away. And it reads just the way as the thing we were trying to avoid. Oh, man, that episode was underwhelming. Hope they do something different next week. You came for a shortcut, but you actually hurt your show. And so that rule that I want to pass to you is very simple. Treat the solo episode like any other. Same standard, same polish. Make your rescue stay invisible. And this is the part I want to leave you with, because whether you work with a shop like mine or not, the production load, leveling, editing, clip work, that's the part you can't afford to skip, because that's the exact part that keeps a solo episode from sounding lazy. So budget for it, time and money-wise. Do it yourself if you've got the chops, the hours, or hand it to someone if you don't. But don't pretend that it isn't there. No guest needed has never once meant no work needed. I want to close the presentation with a real example of how this actually works in practice, because everything I've said today, one person that I know pulled this off in 11 minutes of amazing audio. So my friend Jeremy Tiers is a host of a show called Mission Admissions. It's on the Enrollify podcast network, and their stuff is all about higher ed enrollment and recruitment. It's actually, even if you're not in the industry, Jeremy's conversations are pretty fun. At the end of every season, he does a solo episode. And if I recall correct, he's on his 5th one of these right now. He calls it a quick take. And if you go to his feed, the one that we're looking at today is episode 76. So we're going to autopsy this little thing against everything that we just covered. It's a teaching solo, executed super clean. He walks through 3 bad habits in student recruitment. The way that counselors check in with students, the way schools write marketing-y subject lines to get them to come to college, and how they handle communication after college campus visits. It's 3 ideas, each of them with a concrete fix provided by Jeremy. It's self-contained. It's that one thing episode, right, that we talked about right at the beginning. Has he earned the ability to do a solo episode? Yeah. 76 episodes, 5 seasons, and basically every other episode has an insightful guest? Absolutely. He's built a library of content worth detouring from. He's not pinning it to download numbers or DMs or anything like that. It's based on a body of work. Is the frequency right, like we talked about? 1 quick take per season. He's got 76 episodes and 5 of them. He's pretty much dead on every 15 episodes. He's not spamming these things to fill gaps. These are super purposeful and intentional, and they're timed at the end of a run, kind of the end of a story arc, if you will, of episodes. And then he frames an intention. He opens this by telling you exactly what his format is and why he's bringing it to you today. You never once think, oh, he couldn't get a guest, because it reads as 100% deliberate. And the ambient pipeline piece I mentioned earlier is also at work here. If you listen to this episode, actually now when you listen to this episode, because I would encourage you to do, he casually drops his own survey data. It's that a big chunk of students, north of a quarter of them, say that the subject line of a email is the single biggest factor in whether or not they open that email. Now, if you're in that industry, you read that and think, man, this guy knows about enrollment. He just dropped some data that I've never heard before. He didn't pitch you. He demonstrated to you what he does. That's Jeremy's day job, is helping colleges up their enrollment. And if you're interested in student enrollment for universities, I can almost guarantee that the second you hear that, you're searching his show notes for that data, or you're going to reach out to him for it yourself to get it from him. That's a watering hole. That's where it is attracting people in towards his podcast. And it's also, this episode is micro content ready by design. He has 3 discrete segments already, 3 clean clips, no hunting. And honestly, you can probably air most of those as short form content at 3 minutes of length or under. Now, given what I told you about length, let's take a look at why that works, because this runs about 11 minutes under the 15-minute floor that I mentioned before. But you know what? Jeremy gets a pass on this, because every single minute in this 11-minute episode earns its place. There's no padding. And it's proof of exactly what I said. The person who listens to this episode is finding value, not just filling runtime. All right. Let's review real quick the things I want you to walk out with. 8 of them today. Number 1, solo episodes, self-contained, one idea, not a variety show. Number 2, earn it with your library, not at downloads, not vanity metrics. Number 3, use it sparingly. 1 in 15, maybe? There you go. Number 4, framing on intention, never on absence. It is special because you chose to do it, not because you have to do it. Number 5, script it out fully. Your voice, every little weird thing that you say, put that in there because it increases the authenticity. It increases what you do with your time in front of the mic. Number 6, respect that 15-minute floor unless you can creep down under it with additional value. Number 7, it's a hosting time saver, not a production shortcut. Treat it like any other episode. And lastly, number 8, repurpose the living daylights out of this because you know where the good stuff is. So I want to leave you where we started, with that empty chair across the table from you. For a lot of hosts, that empty chair feels like a real problem. It's a week they couldn't fill. I want you to start seeing it as the opposite. The empty chair is the one time that nobody else in your room is talking. It's your platform. It's your podium. And sometimes you should step up to it yourself. It's a chance to teach the things that only you can teach, to take the stand that only you can take, and to become a voice in your industry that they actually return to. Reframing it as a gap in your schedule to the most concentrated shot that your audience ever gets of you is a major win. Now, just don't take the mistake of no guest needed for no work needed. Respect your listener. Respect the time, craft, put in the polish. And a solo episode will likely do much more for you than almost anything in your feed. And a lot of what makes a show worth listening to is how you show up to the mic. It's how you prep to sound natural instead of scripted. It's how to pitch yourself to guests, to other shows, to get things recording in the first place. And I was talking about it earlier. That's exactly what we built Pitch Lab around. And as a thanks for spending this hour, those first couple modules, we're going to send those out. And if you want the whole thing, that 15% code off there. I'm from Milwaukee. We have a lot of dive bars. And if you were here for some of our earlier presentations, you know that you should always play the dive bars, especially when you're starting at the lower levels of podcasting, of course. So dive bars 0726 gets you 15% off the course. And lastly, if you are running a podcast and production is getting the better of you, let's have a conversation. Bernie, I'll provide you with my link to put in the chat there for everybody here. But I just want to say at the end here, thanks everybody for being here. Go out there, make something worth listening to, even if it's just you. We'll be here for around 5 or 10 more minutes of questions, and we'll be in great shape.